Yeah.
So great and good morning. Welcome to this 12th lecture, CSIG-VIS International Lecture Series. So we are honored to have Professor Angus Forbes from the University of California, Santa Cruz to give this talk on creative exploration in visual computing. So Professor Angus, he directs the UCSC Creative Coding Lab. His research investigates novel techniques for visualizing and interacting with complex scientific information. And his interactive artwork has been featured at museums, galleries, and festivals throughout the world. From 2013 through 2017, he chaired the IEEE Arts Program, a forum that promotes dialogue about the relation of aesthetics and design to visualization research. He also helps to organize ACM SIGGRAPH, serving as the SIGGRAPH Arts Paper Chair in 2018 and the SIGGRAPH Arts Gallery Chair in 2021. Okay, so Professor Angus, you can start your talk. Okay, I stop here.
Thanks for the introduction, Wei Zeng, and I also wanted to thank Rebecca Zhu for inviting me and everyone that's part of the CSIG-VIS organization. It's an honor to be here. Let me just figure out how to share my screen. Is that working? Can you see my screen? Is it? Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, it works.
Okay, give me a second to organize some windows. All right, so today the title of my talk is Creative Explorations in Visual Computing. And I will be giving an overview of recent and ongoing work from the UC Santa Cruz Creative Coding Lab, which I'm the research director of. The lab's research focuses on developing interactive data visualization techniques and also recently on exploring topics in graphics and rendering, and also even more recently on simulation. The lab has a collaborative focus, as you'll see in the projects I introduce. We often work with experts, mainly scientists, to identify interesting problems and to find meaningful solutions to those problems. So in today's talk, I'll be providing an overview of these research interests through a few of my research projects in data visualization, simulation, graphics, and also interactive arts. So a main focus of the lab is on visualizing complex data sets. I'm especially drawn to thinking about how to work with dynamic network data. Recent collaborators include neuroscientists, astrophysicists, ecologists, and linguists. I often like to explore different display technologies, including virtual reality and augmented reality, and to investigate the effectiveness of different representations. A trend in our recent work is learning from data using machine learning in different ways, particularly for image processing and data reconstruction, as you'll see in some of the later projects. So I'll start by just showing kind of a quick overview of some data viz projects. And then I'll show also, my lab has this other side where we focus on creative work as well. And part of the point of this talk is to show how creative exploration can influence computer science research or visualization research. So as I mentioned, I like to work on projects, what are sometimes called immersive analytics projects, visualization projects in VR space or using augmented reality. This is a screenshot from the NeuroCave project. NeuroCave is a collaboration with psychiatric neuroscientists, Alex Liu and Olu Ajalor from the University of Illinois, Chicago. Using VR headsets, we can visualize and compare brain connectomes in various topological spaces, and then the neuroscientists can use these visualizations to help infer which brain regions are associated with particular neurological diseases. A particular area of interest in the lab is exploring new ways of visualizing networks. This is a project called Reaction Flow by Tommy Dang, who used to be part of my lab but is now a professor at Texas Tech University, and myself. The project uses animation to highlight flows of information along paths in the network. So it's a little bit of an unusual way to lay out a network diagram. But here we wanted the user to be able to emphasize particular pathways and to reorganize the pathways. And then we use these arcs, we animate information among these arcs to highlight how the information is flowing and then bifurcating and branching as it moves through the network. A recent project called CSIG-VIS aims to make it easier to explore and analyze large cosmological simulations of the universe. Data visualization often focuses on representing existing data sets, but there are many phenomena that are difficult to capture completely. And simulations can be used to help reason about these phenomena and perhaps can help scientists to prioritize particular observations, that is, to validate theories generated from examining simulated data sets. So in this project, we visualize volumetric data, scalar fields, densities, dark matter, gases, along with particle data representing galaxies or galaxy halos. And the software includes enhanced navigation and querying tools. It uses a client-server architecture where the simulation computation is done on a high-performance computing cluster called Nautilus, and then it streams the visualization data on demand to a client web browser. These simulations can be terabytes in size, which is too unwieldy for browser-based software, but we can still provide a useful visual representation at much lower resolutions and enable users to load in specified higher resolution regions on demand. So this is a screenshot of the CSIG-VIS interface with various widgets to load and analyze data. The CSIG-VIS visualization software includes many different tools for selecting different types of data and for filtering and rendering and thresholding the data in different ways and for choosing different color maps, etc. The tool is already being used by astrophysicists to facilitate analyses of a range of cosmic structures and to gain insight into, for example, the metal enrichment of gases surrounding different types of galaxies. And we're preparing for a public launch of the software to coincide with a paper publication which was just accepted to IEEE TVCG. Since many of these simulations include different snapshots of the data of the universe as it evolves from the Big Bang to now, we're also exploring how to work with animations between these snapshots and working with our astrophysics collaborators to think through how these animations could enable analyses, new types of analyses of temporal features. Perhaps unusual for computer science labs is that my lab also encourages, as I mentioned before, creative exploration and art production. And there's different reasons for this. One is because I believe that the tools for interactive content, for making motion graphics, game engines, 3D modeling tools for creating visual effects are becoming increasingly sophisticated. And I believe there's a huge opportunity to use these types of tools for visualization research. A lot of InfoVis projects have kind of a minimalist aesthetic, which makes sense because you want to visualize the data in as clear and precise a way without anything extra so that you can really reason about the actual data that you're showing. But I think there's so many techniques from cinema and from interactive design and from 3D modeling and from video games that are also presenting very busy data in ways that can still be apprehended by our perception and also can be reasoned about by a player or by a user. And so to me, using these creative tools could be a real exciting area of investigation in data viz. Also, the media landscape is increasingly defined by these tools, and I think it's important for technologists, generally speaking, to be familiar with these types of tools. And I believe that creative exploration is important. Having a lab that has both artists and researchers, I think, is useful for the artists. And my artists, their point is to express their thoughts and their feelings and their aesthetic vision, but also to comment on society. And if as artists are living today in a technological world, in an information-rich world, and it would make sense that artists want to comment on that technology. So having artists in a lab situation, I think, is good for certain types of artworks, for media arts works, for information art, because they get a chance to be exposed to actual research that's going on, whether in my lab or throughout the department or throughout the university. And similarly, I think that creative explorations can lead to new insights that are useful in research contexts, that just by creating an artwork in and of itself, it may inspire new ideas that have interesting ramifications for research. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when I look at some other projects in this talk. So as a media artist myself, I believe that there's value in exploring the expressive capabilities and cultural ramifications of new technologies. And additionally, you can't always predict what new research opportunities might be generated from creative exploration, or how the results of a creative exploration might end up having a pragmatic use in, say, augmenting scientific research in some way. So I'm just going to show you a couple projects that were intended to have a creative output. Just quickly, and then I'll show you a few examples of where the creative and the research mix in a really exciting way, a serendipitous way. So I've been interested in generative art or algorithmic art for a while. This is a project called Fluid Automata that enables users to create a wide range of expressive animations using multi-touch. It's been used in various live performances, including in VR environments and in collaboration with composers, such as a recent performance with the composer Kiyomitsu Odai. I've also worked on video processing effects. This one is inspired by Curtis Rhodes' granular synthesis, but thinks of grains within video signals instead of within audio signals. The technique lets you take different voxels from a cube of video data and rearrange it spatially and temporally for a variety of responsive animated effects. I've also created a series of what I'm calling information poems. This one is an animation that illustrates the dynamics of a climate change model by expressing extreme deviations from historical or predicted averages through synchronized distortions in the world map through animation. I've also had the opportunity to work on a number of interactive installations. We received a commission from the Bogota Book Fair, which is a large arts and literary fair in South America and Colombia. We received a commission to make an interactive installation to explore literary themes in Gabriel Garcia Marquez's novel 100 Years of Solitude. This image here is from our project Wakando. It's a collaboration with the artists George LaGrady and Andres Burbano, updating some of the techniques of LaGrady's well-known Pocket Full of Memories project to facilitate visitors finding personal connections within the novel. And the users are able to upload photos from their cell phone into the installation that match particular themes that are animating in the installation, and then they get embedded in the animation itself. Students in my lab also get involved in creative projects, for example, by contributing data analyses, interface design, or by developing techniques to enable creative experiences. This is an image from a project called Riverwalk, developed in collaboration with lead designer Jeffrey Allen Rhodes from the School of the Art Institute and the Chicago History Museum. My student at the time, Marco Cavallo, who's now at Apple, developed a computer vision system to recognize architectural features in various outdoor conditions so that the historical images and historical videos containing those elements, those architectural features, could be superimposed upon them, turning the city of Chicago into an interactive outdoor gallery. So those black and white photos, basically you walk along the river and you use your camera to scan the buildings, and it's able to discern exactly where the photo was taken, and then it will superimpose the photo into the scene. And so you can see these photos taken 100 years ago or more. I think these are from 1916 and 1917. So you get kind of this time travel effect as you walk along the river. This is a more recent project. Richard Grillotti is a former MFA student in the UC Santa Cruz Digital Arts and New Media program. I met him when he took my class in immersive visualization. He developed a project that lets you control and amplify the sounds that create cymatics patterns in a dish of water. And then you can manipulate the colored lights that shine onto the water to create these very interesting patterns. And then they're then projected on this circular screen. And also you sit in this custom armchair he built, and the sounds, so you're tweaking both the colors and the sounds. And the sounds are used to create the different patterns because it makes the water vibrate in different ways. And then that sound is amplified through your body, so you also feel it haptically or physically, as well as hear it and see it. As you'll see with some of the projects I discussed today, having a creative outlook led directly to some of the visualization innovations. And as I mentioned before, a lot of the visualization work comes out of collaboration with scientists. A few years ago, my lab was tasked with creating a range of interactive visualization tools for biologists using various bioinformatics data sets. In creating tools, visualization tools, often the first step, I think, is to survey the existing landscape of tools and talk to the users of these tools themselves to figure out what exactly it is they are using them for and to find out what it is they like about them or don't like about them. And so as part of the survey for this project, we looked at some of the common visualizations of signaling pathways which are used to try and understand the molecular structure of the behavior, basically, of cancer. So this image shows what's called the RAS pathway, a signaling pathway that is indicated in a wide range of cancers and therefore very actively studied by cancer biologists. So this image is part of the KEGG database, which aims to summarize empirically validated knowledge about these biological pathways. It's made by hand, and while with a little training the layout is more or less easy to read, overall I'd say it feels a bit cluttered, even with only a relatively small amount of information being shown at the same time. And there's no way to rearrange it to emphasize a particular aspect of the pathway. Another widely used online database is called Reactome. It's a little more sophisticated. It's innovative in that it integrates multiple biological pathways into a single interface and provides information about where they connect and overlap. It was also created by hand, at least the individual parts, but I'd say it's perhaps, even though it's more powerful in some ways, it's also perhaps a bit more difficult to interpret, which makes sense given the complexity of the data. Both of those two previous visualizations were manually curated and arranged. But what if you want to load in custom data, say extracted from the analysis of a biopsy, or to see all the biochemical reactions between 2 or 3 different pathways? So this screenshot is from a project called Cytoscape that automatically generated a network layout for a custom data set. Cytoscape is a very powerful tool, and people who become expert in Cytoscape can make really nice looking network diagrams, but by default, using the default layout, you get a really messy, hard to interpret visualization. It indicates a common issue in visualization, especially automated layouts with any of networks. With any deeply interconnected data set with dense linkages, you get this hairball image causing the visualization to be more or less unreadable, which ironically is exactly the opposite of the results you want from a visualization. The point of a visualization ideally is to be able to see the data clearly and to reason about it. So here we have an example, again, a little bit unfair because Cytoscape is powerful, of a network layout tool actually obscuring the very data it's meant to illustrate. Oops. So recognizing that we might want to be able to customize the data we're looking at, and also that only a subset of the pathways might be of interest to biologists for a particular study or at a particular time, my lab worked on developing a tool that presents the relevant aspects of a particular pathway and that generates a layout that it's easier to read, in this case, from left to right. The data comes from Dr. Daniel Kim's lab. He's a professor affiliated with the UC Santa Cruz Genomics Institute. In addition to showing what I would argue is a more accessible view of, in this case, the KRAS pathway, it also allows Dr. Kim's team to overlay additional information from their experiments on top of the visualization. Here's another example of this project, again, using data from Dr. Daniel Kim's lab. We rearrange the biological data so that it's easier to read and emphasize the elements that the researchers themselves care most about and that communicate particular concepts most clearly to the intended audience, which is the scientists themselves and also their partners that they're working with. Effective data visualization is drawn both from our understanding of how visual elements affect the human vision system and is also inspired, oftentimes, by the literature of graphic design and interaction design, which focuses on creating an arrangement of elements that makes it easier to identify and to reason about the information on a page or on a screen. So what I advocate for, at least in some of my projects, is that when possible, it's helpful to create more focused visualizations that target a specific audience rather than trying to create or to try and predict a more general solution to data that you may be less familiar with. The process of creating an effective representation is difficult. more difficult, more nuanced than it might seem at first. And indeed, you often don't discover exactly what tasks are important to facilitate until you started making the visualization. So I think there's a lot of room for people with a strong visual sensibility or strong graphic design sensibility to be involved in visualization, not to make one size fits all tool with lots of knobs, but rather to work directly with the researchers who are using the data to create targeted tools that actually help them understand their own data. So a lot of my work involves creating new techniques for navigating and analyzing data and collaborating with scientists who have complex data sets that can benefit from new representations. For many projects, it's useful to provide static snapshots of a particular state of data, but of course, most of the systems we analyze are constantly in flux. And another goal of visual analysis interfaces can be to make sense of dynamic data sets. There are more than 250,000 proteins in a single human cell and around 10,000 different protein types, each of which can potentially exist in different states and which can rapidly change. Even with the best visual encodings for a network of this complexity, there's really not a way to avoid a hairball. So in this project, it's called Dynamic Influence Networks. It was created in collaboration with a systems biology research group at Harvard Medical School led by Dr. Walter Fontana. In this project, we explored ways in which to provide insight into the dynamics of intracellular behavior without trying to represent each protein or even each type of protein. So here in the snapshot, in the screenshot here, where it's an image, we're showing that we're modeling the dynamics of a protein-protein interaction network of cyanobacteria with an oscillating circadian rhythm. The main idea of the visualization here is that rather than visualizing the individual types of proteins, each node represents a rule that defines a particular behavior in the system, and the edges indicate whether or not that rule makes it more or less likely for the other rules to be activated. That is, we visualize the rules about how they are likely to function given the presence of other proteins. More specifically, we are visualizing the influence that the rules have on each other and how this influence changes over time. We then created data movies, animations that illustrate how these rules are activated and deactivated over time within the system. These interactive movies enable researchers to analyze the dynamics of the mechanisms of the interactome and to reason about why these mechanisms give rise to coherent systems behavior, or to investigate when there's a breakdown in coherent behavior, such as when the cell's cancerous or diseased in some other way, or aging. Using our CSIG-VIS tool, the user can interactively filter on particular thresholds so that only rules that are above or below a certain amount of activity are visible. So a researcher can fine-tune the visualization to focus on areas they're interested in. And part of the goal of this tool is not just to simulate the rules, but to use it potentially to design rules that lead to more accurate or more useful simulations in the future. So users can interactively pull out rules of interest and tweak their behavior so that it matches empirical observations, or to experiment with the rules to imagine, say, what would happen if a drug intervention inhibited the influence of a particular rule. So this project is an example where trying to show all of the data in the biological network would be completely untenable just because there's so much data, even inside one single cell. So instead, we're visualizing this meta network to highlight rules and their influence on other rules in order to provide insight into the dynamics of the system as it changes over time. So as part of this is a different project called CSIG-VIS. As part of an ongoing collaboration with astrophysicists from UC Santa Cruz, as well as from New Mexico State University and Caltech, my lab has been creating visualization tools to understand various cosmological data sets as part of a Hubble Space Telescope grant funded by the Space Telescope Science Institute. We developed a project called CSIG-VIS. IGM stands for Intergalactic Medium. This tool has a 3D interface that superimposes what are called quasar sightlines over a catalog of galaxies surveyed by the Hubble Space Telescope. Our CSIG-VIS tool enables astrophysicists to combine data sets in order to infer the composition of intergalactic media at different regions of the universe. This particular region of the universe is called the Coma Cluster, and researchers that we're working with are interested in measuring and analyzing the gaseous halos surrounding galaxies and galaxy clusters in order to get a better sense of how these galaxies formed and more generally to get a sense of how the universe has evolved. The data set we worked with has over 20,000 different galaxies in the Coma cluster or surrounding it, and the galaxies are on average 322 million light years from Earth, meaning that when the Hubble Space Telescope captures images of these galaxies, they're actually capturing what they looked like over 300 million years ago. So here's a higher resolution image of one of the galaxies in the Coma cluster. Although these images are beautiful and breathtaking and kind of mind-blowing, space telescopes also record what are called absorption signatures for the galaxies. They have specialized instrumentation which measures the kind of like a mass spectrometer, which measures the metallicity along the sight line from the telescope into space. And the data that astrophysicists work with in practice often looks more like this, which is not as aesthetically impressive, but shows the spectra across the depth of the universe along these sight lines as they intersect with galaxies. And this data is what astrophysicists actually use for their analyses in order to understand the gases within and surrounding the galaxies. So here's a screenshot of an initial version of our tool, CSIG-VIS, where we show an abstracted and interactive 3D view of the Coma cluster, which can be accessed via a web browser. And here's what the data analysis dashboard looked like in the initial version of the tool. It provides detailed information about selected galaxies, along with a represented image of selected galaxies in the Coma cluster, and also provides a view of the more detailed measurements along the sight lines, as well as interactive plots of the spectra showing the absorption signatures for specific galaxies on demand. So a large part of the work in these astrophysics data visualizations is creating interfaces that are capable, one, of managing large amounts of data, and two, providing interactive features that make it possible to see interrelations between the data sets, or to see multiple data sets combined simultaneously and from different viewpoints. And then also, in addition to seeing it, navigating it, being able to select particular, in this case, galaxies, in order to analyze the data on the fly without having to wait for the data to load or be processed or be displayed. So they can quickly get a sense of what they're looking at. And here's a screenshot of the current version of the tool after going through some design iterations once we were satisfied with the main functionality. There's a lot of reasons why I find working on visualization projects important and meaningful. The main one being that large, complicated data sets often require representations that are specific to a particular analysis task. And taking a step back to think about the data science aspects as well as the design aspects together can lead to new tools that empower researchers working on specialized, contemporary scientific investigations. And more, beyond the practical utility of the tool itself, which I think is important, I value the iterative design process of working with others to identify the important tasks and building together the interactive process that leads to a new workflow or that causes a new set of questions to emerge. So in addition to the fundamental needs or pain points that perhaps justify the effort in the first place, many people working on interesting problems have a series of lots of interesting research ideas that they'd like to think about, and the visualization tool itself can be the site for putting together a novel view of the data that enables new questions. So in many cases, these tools are not only just new representations of data, as important as that is, but are part of a process of collaboratively formalizing speculations about and interpretations of new measurements and of new data. Oftentimes in my visualization papers, in addition to presenting a tool or a visualization technique, the paper devotes space to the design process itself, indicating the needs and goals of our collaborators and outlining the main tasks that they want the visualization to facilitate. So for example, in the paper that introduces CSIG-VIS, we explain who our collaborators are and who we're talking to get feedback from during the design process. And in this case, we spoke to everyone from full professors to graduate students. And we also spend time trying to formalize the analysis task that the visualization tool is meant to enable. So in this case, creating this task taxonomy, was a necessary step for prioritizing the functionality that was ultimately included in IGM-VIS. And also, I believe it could serve as a useful starting point to other data scientists or visualization designers who are working in this space. In other words, this analysis of the needs of the users, I think, is itself a contribution. And many of my articles, as I mentioned, do devote space to articulating these needs. And I would just say that part of having a good design sensibility is understanding your audience, understanding who you're designing for. And so I would say people have asked me, what's the process? Do you first survey and interview? I'd say it's kind of all done at once. I'm surveying people, I'm interviewing people, I'm trying to figure out what the main tasks are at the same time as I'm building prototypes and getting feedback. And then I'm kind of constantly cycling on that until a meaningful visual representation emerges and until it's really clear what the analysis tasks are. And what's interesting is that sometimes the tasks you think are the most important, actually once you've started developing the prototype, it turns out are less important. They were just articulated because it's what people are familiar with, but what the scientists or the collaborators want is something different once they see that it's possible to actually do that. So that's a really exciting part about building the tool. And it's nice to think of that building process as research in and of itself. The next project I want to talk about involves creative explorations of a popular creative coding algorithm that led to new insight in astrophysics research. This is about a tool called Polyform, which is an agent-based simulation for interactive data reconstruction. It has a somewhat unorthodox origin and illustrates the opportunities that can emerge in a lab that encourages creative exploration. While deep learning networks are probably the most notable recent innovation in machine learning, there's also other flavors of algorithms that learn from data. Inspired by the work of researchers like Adam Adamansky and Jeff Jones, we've been exploring how intelligent agents modeled on the foraging behavior of a slime mold organism called Physarum polycephalum can learn spatial features of sparse data sets and use this knowledge to extrapolate from the data to generate plausible interpolations between those data points. So this project was inspired initially by my students who were interested in using this Physarum polycephalum model to create interactive generative artworks. There's an artist named Sage Jensen based in Germany. They have a project, an ongoing project, different iterations of it, that focuses on creating aesthetic simulations of the foraging behavior of slime mold. And so just to step back a little bit, these slime mold are often found after it rains in a forest. I live in Santa Cruz, and you can see them actually out in the woods here. Sometimes when a tree falls down, the slime mold will take over it. And they have an interesting quality is that they're spreading along the trunk of the tree looking for nutrients that they consume. And if you see a time lapse of the slime mold, it first looks like just kind of a sheet of yellow. But as it forages, it kind of intelligently figures out how to make these networks, these lattices, these ventricles, and creates these beautiful network diagrams, what look like network diagrams. And they are optimally figuring out how to reach every food point on the tree. They have an amazing range of behaviors. If you do look at the time lapses online, I don't have one here, but you can search for slime mold time lapse and find all sorts of beautiful sped up videos that it really does seem like they have this alien intelligence. But they've been used, the real Physarum polycephalum organism has been used for a bunch of interesting experiments, including one where they basically took the Physarum polycephalum, put it in a petri dish, and they put its food sources in all the stations in Tokyo. And then they dropped the Physarum polycephalum in. And then it kind of navigated around the petri dish looking for food. And when it was done, what was left behind was this trail system that very closely matched the actual Tokyo rail map. So it's pretty intriguing that just all by itself, it's able to figure out the ideal way to optimize its resources. As I mentioned before, there's an algorithm created by a researcher named Jeff Jones, who made a 2D model of Physarum polycephalum and how it forages for food. And it's been utilized by a range of different artists, including Sage Jensen, as I mentioned, and a number of other artists, some who work with the actual organism and some who work with the computational model to create these beautiful organic-looking systems. And I think why it's so interesting is because some of the patterns that emerge are completely unexpected. It'll change state from one interesting pattern, and all of a sudden you tweak one parameter just slightly, or just let the system run for a few minutes, and all of a sudden there's a completely different, unexpected thing that occurs. And so these kind of state transitions are really exciting, and some of the emergent behavior that comes from it is very evocative. This is an example of the postdoc in my lab, Oscar Ellick, who's done a lot of this research. He created an interactive art system. So this is his version of slime mold art. He's using it for live coding and using it in performance. And one of the explorations we did in our lab that's kind of a more creative exploration is adapting the existing Physarum model, computational model, which was meant to work in 2D, and basically want to see what if we extend it to the third dimension, what kind of patterns will we get. So we have a paper that's accepted and should appear in Artificial Life very soon, MIT Press's Artificial Life, where we explore the range of patterns that you can get from our system just by tweaking parameters slightly. Or by adding additional agents, or by giving the different agents different ability to sense in wider directions. And there's also a probabilistic component to our data, so that you can run the same system again and again and start capturing kind of statistically the types of features that will emerge when a system's run under certain parameters. So basically through serendipity, because we were working on the IGM-VIS project and the COSMO-VIS project with these astrophysicists looking at these galaxies, kind of a serendipitous moment happened where we thought about the Physarum polycephalum and imagined, what if the galaxies were the food sources? So I showed the example where someone had used Physarum polycephalum to map out a rail system where they put food sources at each railway station. What if we did the same thing in 3D, but with the galaxies? What would emerge? And so it turns out that the prevailing theory about the universe is that it's structured by these enormous, like cosmologically huge dark matter filaments that constitute what's called the cosmic web. But the prevailing theory is that they're made from dark matter, and by its very nature, dark matter cannot be detected by our instrumentation. However, it can be inferred through investigating the composition of gases surrounding galaxies. So a question that our astrophysics partners are investigating is to ask the question, where is the cosmic web exactly? We can see hints of the cosmic web structure simply by the clustering of galaxies. So if we look at this image here, this is from the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, a slice of galaxies from a certain distance away from Earth. And just by looking at this, if you kind of squint, you can see it's not just noise, it's not just static. There's clearly clustering and there's patterns here. And if you can almost see that there might be some tendrils or some edges or some lines linking this data together. But the density of data here is not really sufficient to reconstruct the cosmic web without additional considerations. So there are attempts to do so, where they look at the placement of the galaxies and they try and infer where the gases are in the galaxies, and they can kind of do a rough estimate. But we thought, since we have this tool whose whole point is to forage between different points to create structure, could we apply it to this data set? And in fact, we were successful in doing so. We were able to trace these density fields on various data sets, both empirically collected data like the Sloan Digital Sky Survey and also on simulation data sets. And using our system, which runs on the GPU, we could actually run the simulation very quickly and indeed let the researchers tweak the parameters to see what got the best fit. So first we tried to see if we could replicate some of the simulation data, removing large chunks of the data, and then seeing if our slime mold model was able to reproduce what was missing, to kind of in-paint between what we had taken out. And this was successful, statistically speaking. We next applied it to empirical data that was observed using the Hubble Space Telescope and checked to see if the density of gases at different locations matched observations from the quasar sightline measurements. And these, again, somewhat surprisingly, matched very well. And then using our agent-based learning algorithm, which we're calling Monte Carlo Fizzer machine, along with interactive navigation tools and a visualization tool we're calling Polyform, we're able to provide what our astrophysics collaborators believe is a reasonable initial guess into the location and composition of dark matter filaments. So this is just a screenshot or arrangement of screenshots from our tool. There's various thresholding tools and color maps where we can highlight the edges and the density of the gases in different ways. So we can actually offer a better speculation about what these filaments are, not just their structure and where they're located, but actually what they're made up of in terms of the density of their gases or the metallicity. This Polyform tool has been used by different teams of astrophysicists to explore what are called fast radio bursts. Fast radio bursts are these signals from the depths of outer space, and part of the way they reason about what they are and what their signal is they know they pass through certain regions of the universe which interfere with the signal, including filaments of the cosmic web. And so using our cosmic web simulation, they can get a more precise sense of what this fast radio burst signal consists of. And so kind of excitingly, this tool, which began as a creative exploration, was then adapted to a specific scientific inquiry and now is being used by other teams to make sense of astrophysics data collected by various telescopes. So I think this is kind of a great example of the benefits of art science practice, or the benefits of including designers and artists in the lab and letting them work next to each other and work collaboratively and to share ideas. Not every creative project leads to scientific breakthroughs, but when it happens, it's very exciting. I'll skip these slides. This kind of just summarizes some of the scientific findings. They were published in one of the top astrophysics journals called Astrophysics Journal Letters. Now we're currently adapting the Polyform tool, which uses our Fizzer and polycephalum algorithm for a variety of different explorations. And here is a screenshot of a tool created by my postdoc Oscar Ellick and one of my students, Henry Zhao. We're exploring the geometry of late and high dimensional word embedding spaces. So seeing if we can use our algorithm to make sense of linguistic data or natural language processing algorithms. And ongoing research looks into finding knots and filaments of meaning in a language data set. And this is a collaboration with Pranav Anand, who's a linguist here at UC Santa Cruz. We're also looking at how we could use this algorithm for computational fabrication and computational architecture. Here we're exploring building bio-inspired scaffoldings for 3D printing. We've also used the tool itself is inspired by this algorithm that's used by various artists, and now we're kind of going full circle and using our tool to create new artworks. We collaborated with an artist here in Santa Cruz named Colleen Flanagan, who creates these underwater sculptures that are meant to look like the beds of coral reefs, and in fact are electrically charged so that they inspire new coral reefs to grow underwater. And so she's creating sculptures that have these filaments along them. And this is more of an artistic project than a scientifically validated project, but she believes these kind of nooks and crannies that are created by the slime mold algorithm are actually superior for potentially letting the coral latch onto it in different ways. And we're also exploring various rendering techniques to make the filaments look like actual slime mold or the actual fizzerum using various path tracing techniques. And here is just a couple more kind of evocative visual renderings of some data sets. I think I've got a few minutes left, so For the remainder of this talk, I'm just going to quickly walk through a couple of other projects that that illustrate other areas of interest in the lab. Machine learning is become very popular. All of my students and myself, I've become very interested in the power of machine learning. I have one student in particular named Manu Thomas, who has been very excited by what's sometimes called neural rendering, which basically means incorporating machine learning into computer graphics techniques. And a few years ago, he had a very ambitious project where he wanted to see if he could design a convolutional neural network to learn global illumination features. So basically, if you input a direct lighting, which can be computed very quickly because basically you're assuming all light rays emanate from a light source and then hit a surface and light that surface. If you could input a direct lighting image and have it output a path traced image, which is much more complicated because here you're assuming, multiple light sources are all emitting, tons and tons of photons, which then hit a surface. Some of the energy gets absorbed, but some of the energy scatters. So then you have to trace that ray or that photon through the scene as it bounces off all the sources until finally it loses, you can hit a certain threshold after 10 or 20 or 100 bounces, where you can decide that the light has most of the energy from a photon has been absorbed into a surface. But by doing that, by tracing all of these photons through the scene, all these rays, you get much more interesting, more photorealistic light, where you have indirect light, and you have soft shadows, and you get reflections. So we wanted to see if we could train a neural network to translate direct lighting into a more photorealistic lighting. So we have a project called Deep Illumination, where we train the neural network using just a few objects in a very simple scene with just a few camera positions, and I think only one light, or in this case, two lights, using some simple primitives and then also a couple of more complicated objects. And then we wanted to see if it would give effective results with brand new geometry that it had never seen, with brand new light placements it hadn't seen, and with brand new camera positions. So it's not perfect. This is from a few years back. The research was done in 2017, and we put an archive paper out in 2018. But even though the results I wouldn't say are perfect, it was kind of amazing that it worked at all. So again, proving to us that there was possibilities in using neural networks for rendering itself and for lighting itself. So we trained our tool called Deep Illumination on both geometry, but also on particle systems, and got pretty good results. And now we're working on a kind of an extension of this using lightweight networks, or what are called reduced precision networks, to see if we can get really large convolutional neural networks to fit on a single GPU by using reduced precision operations. And the idea here is, it's a little more generalized than the previous one. Here we're trying to put in any low resolution input that might be noisy. If you run ray tracing for just a few seconds or with less samples, you get what looks like a good image, but it's noisy. Whereas if you run it for a long time, you'll be able to trace all the photons bouncing around and eventually get like a very nice looking photorealistic image. But if you don't have all the time in the world, if you wanted to run at real-time rates, you can't possibly compute all that. So oftentimes there's this idea of denoising, where you run it just for a few milliseconds and just get a few thousand samples or even a few dozen samples per pixel. And then there'll be artifacts, but use machine learning to kind of do what's called denoising to process the final image and smooth it out. And also to do what's called super sampling, where you give it a low resolution image and you can increase the size of the image. So his idea is, can we create a neural network that does all of this at once, that does anti-aliasing, denoising, and super sampling at the same time? And so we've gotten great results so far. Here's an example of some of the input images. On the top left there, you see a very kind of aliased, you got the jaggies, but when we run through a neural network, it's able to smooth out those artifacts. And here I'm just showing a static screenshot, but it's also able to, it takes in the current frame, but also takes in previous frames, and it's able to smooth out these artifacts, both spatially, but also temporally. And on the bottom, you can see kind of a noisier image with a ray tracing algorithm that hasn't run for very long, and we can denoise that image to get a really nice looking photorealistic image. And ultimately, we hope to be able to speed up ray tracing and path tracing to be able to generate computationally expensive photorealistic effects such as reflections, indirect illumination, soft shadows, and caustics in real time to get Pixar level animations in a game or in real-time interactive media. I'll skip these. These are just some comparisons we did. And basically, the point of these comparisons is that our real-time version performs as well or even slightly better than the state-of-the-art offline version. So we're super excited about this ongoing work. Many students in the computational media department and in my lab at UC Santa Cruz are very interested, as I said, in incorporating machine learning techniques into their creative work as well. So this project was created by Mahika Dubey and Jasmine Otto. They became interested in how style transfer networks can be used for creative purposes, and also in exploring some of the aesthetic qualities of different data design and data art projects. So as part of this exploration, called Data Brushes, they created the Data Brushes tool that creates different style transfer networks for different artworks and lets you use them as brushes to create interactive collages. And moreover, they explored how to use these brushes applied to different target materials to give a better, more intuitive understanding of the primary features that the style transfer network has learned in the training process. So in this slide, you can see examples of their interacting collaging application using a number of pre-trained data art style brushes trained on the work of various data designers such as Giorgia Lupi and Edward Tufte, and they're applied to a photograph by Mike Kelly, who's a really interesting photographer who creates these interesting photo collages where you can see every airplane that took off at once or every basketball that was thrown at once. So on the very left, you see the actual photograph, and then every other slice is one or more style transfer brushes applied to a segment of the photograph. There's been a lot written about bias in AI technologies. You've probably heard of Cathy O'Neill's Weapons of Math Destruction and Ruha Benjamin's Race After Technology. Avital Meshi, MFA student in the Digital Arts and New Media program at UC Santa Cruz, is interested in making people aware of how machine learning systems and computer vision systems see users. So in her classification cube project, participants can view a variety of different machine learning analyses of their own body that are trying to classify them in terms of their age, their gender, their pose, their expression, their emotion. They can then enter into this artwork and compare their classification with that of other bodies and examine their ability to alter their classification by engaging in different performative behaviors, which also helps users notice different forms of bias that are embedded in these algorithms. So in addition to making it clear that some expressions and poses are incorrectly categorized, or that a person's age and gender can be misclassified depending on seemingly minor changes in expression or posture, whether you're smiling or furrowing your brow or even just turning your head slightly differently, the project provides a space for reflecting on the ubiquitous automated interpretations that permeate our daily lives. And this is another reason why I believe that art and science should coexist, because arts projects can be a space that lets you think critically about the technology that you are developing. And I recently came across work by designer Martin Lambrechts, who repurposed a visualization layout algorithm called Cactus Tree that was developed in our lab, led by Tommy Dang, who I mentioned before. He's now at Texas Tech. On the left, you can see an example of the cactus tree that was used in the original Cactus Tree paper we wrote. It's used to show relationships between proteins that are implicated in different infectious diseases. And on the right, an artistic representation of a data set of different soil microbes using Martin Lambrecht's adapted, modified version of Cactus Tree. And I personally, I was really psyched when I saw this, that someone had taken our algorithm, our CSIG-VIS technique, and made it look a lot nicer, really focusing on aesthetics. It still has a scientific purpose where it's illustrating a scientific data set, but they really focus more on how to change the transparency and change the layout slightly to make it look rich and organic. So I'm always pleased when when work developed in my lab is used or adapted by others. And all of our code from our lab is open source and available via the lab's GitHub repo. This last slide I want to show, it's not everyone I've worked with on all of these projects, but it's some of the students who are active right now in my lab. And I just want to show them to give them a shout out for all of their amazing contributions to these projects, and their amazing innovations, and their amazing ideas. I think I'll end there. Happy to take any questions. Thank you for Rebecca and Wei and the CSIG-VIS community for inviting me. I hope that kind of quick run through so various projects gives you some insight into what happens in my lab and to why I think emphasizing creativity both in scientific projects and in artistic projects has the potential to create more than the sum of its parts. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Angus, for this wonderful talk. Personally, I found that this talk is really fruitful and covers a lot of topics and projects. So do we have any questions from the audience? From like CMA students and faculty? Yeah. If you have any question, just open your mic and then.
I see Rebecca has a question. She says, "Thank you for a fascinating talk." You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. You work with both scientists and artists. Can you please talk about the factors that influence this type of partnership and also ways to promote a successful collaboration? I guess I'll start out by saying not every collaboration is successful, even with the best of intentions. There's lots of factors that get in the way, and they range from personality differences to time constraints to lack of funding to all sorts of things. And in fact, I'd say most collaborations, they might be exciting, but they don't lead to a paper or to a final project or to an artistic output. I think I've gotten better at making sure collaborations are successful. And I think part of it's because I'm genuinely curious about things I don't know about. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not an astrophysicist. I'm not a biologist. And yet I've gained, a layperson's understanding of it through my research and through my reading. And usually when I talk to people, I have enough knowledge, even though I'm not an expert, that I think I'm able to show that I have enough understanding that it could actually be a fruitful partnership. And also I found that it's thinking of the partnership as a true integrated collaboration. It's not just, hey, I'm the visualization designer who can code up a nice web interface or a nice InfoVis technique. In other words, it's not just they have a problem and I'm solving it, but rather we're working together to see if there's some kind of stones that have not yet been turned over that could be new fruitful investigations. And I think that's both more exciting for me because I don't just work for hire. I'm actually a integral part of a research collaboration. And it's also more interested for the researcher, right? If they know something really well, they don't need a visualization for it. The things they need visualizations for are the things they don't quite understand themselves, or they have data that's hard to work with on their own. And so finding those points that are kind of in the sweet spot of exciting but not impossible takes some legwork. So I don't know, there's a combination of just kind of like humility and patience, and also, when you run a lab, finding the right students for the right problems. If you have a student who's really interested in, digital humanities and philosophy, you may not want to put them on a scientific visualization project. Although maybe you do. It depends. I don't have a great answer for you. I feel like it's partly, I've thought about it before. I've written about it before. I have a paper called Articulating Media Arts Activities that I published in Leonardo a few years back, where I tried to come up with some guidelines, but I don't know if I believe them completely anymore. I think partly it's just, like I said, humility and patience and being aware of opportunities.
Well, thank you. So that's very much to do with with the attitude. But is there any? Well, I guess you just said there's no specific guidelines. But I was wondering, like throughout the working process, besides the goodwill, are there anything else in terms of communication, in terms of the ways to get things done? Is there a particular, because the artists and the scientists, we think things differently. right? So like, are there any specific, I guess I'm pushing a little bit, right? So like, the practical side I'm asking, so.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you meet people. I mean, it's not like I write a letter, dear sir or madame, I would like to collaborate with you. It usually happens more organically. You meet someone at a conference or at our university. Sometimes there's these events where different people are talking about the projects, or students take a class and meet a really interesting professor or student. And so those ideas kind of are just floating around, and they usually happen in a more organic way. And people have different interests. Sometimes they have like a data set they just don't know how to work with, and so they want to talk to somebody about it. Sometimes they have a really visionary idea about using, let's say, VR for something. So then they know that I've worked in VR, so that opens a door. Yeah, I'm trying to think of how things have. Sometimes people, try and get yourself out there and show your work in different venues.
Right.
I mean, obviously I show at, SIG-GRAPH and IEEE-VIS because they're visualization graphics conferences, but I also attend biology conferences, and I've attended neuroscience conferences. And that's a really interesting way to get kind of a lot of different contacts with scientists who you wouldn't meet at your kind of normal conference. So being a little more active about going to places you don't normally go, I think is helpful. Yeah. I'm sorry. You keep pushing if you want to. I don't.
That's pretty good.
Hi.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I have a question here.
Wait, someone else was speaking. Who was speaking?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
this is
speaking. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Yeah, thanks very much for your wonderful report. But I'm from Chinese Academy of Sciences, also do some work about cosmology visualization. Your cosmology visualization is the most impressive in all this report. But one question is about the date. I just visited the website of CSIG-VIS. I found there so many great data, gas, dark matter, stars, and black holes. I wonder that is the simulation date by yourself or cooperating with the scientists in cosmology?
Oh yeah, the simulations are not created by us. We've worked with Cameron Hummels, who is involved in the illustrious TNG simulations. So basically our astrophysics collaborators are already using simulations, and we work with them and figure out how to ingest them and how to stream them. But if you look at, well, the paper's not out yet. The CSIG-VIS paper will be out very soon, and once it's out, you can see all the simulation data sets we worked with. What was the other question about black holes? What was that?
Yeah, the black holes black holes and the star particles were in the right place. That's where the position is decided by the simulation. So.
Oh, you're talking about in polyform, is that right? Or the Cosmo? Are you talking about CSIG-VIS or polyform? In polyform, we've worked with both empirical data, observed data sets. We also worked with simulation data sets, and so we can't see the dark matter. There are simulations that do simulate dark matter, but the ones we were looking at for the polyform experiments, we were just looking at the location of galaxies and then letting polyform infer where the cosmic web that surrounds all the galaxies and makes those tendrils. But some simulations, do have dark matter fields. Some simulations do have black holes. So the CSIG-VIS tool is kind of a more general purpose tool that's meant to be able to load in any simulation data set and let you customize what fields you want to visualize and what color you want to make them, and what color ramps you want to use. And it should work with any simulation. We've worked with just a few at this point, the main one being the illustrious TNG. We've also worked with one called Bolshoi-Planck simulation, and I'm forgetting the third one we worked with on the top of my head. But if you want to reach out to me and ask more questions or talk to me more about it, I'd love to chat with you some more. Here's my email address, angus@ucsc.edu.
Yes, you can directly ask Professor Angus after this talk, or you can also like forward questions to us, and we will forward the questions to Professor Angus as well. Okay. So do we have more questions?
Yeah, actually, I have a question. So this is Liu from Northwestern Polytechnic University. So basically, I have a question about immersive visualization or immersive analytics. So it seems like using VR, AR, or stereoscopic display to just portray data is now becoming a trend in our community or some other communities. So my question is like, in your opinion, like what type of data is suitable, or under what type of circumstance or environment we need to use like this type of stereoscopic display or VR, AR to just trying to deliver the data or some kind of the information behind the data to our viewers?
That's a good question. I know that Tim Dwyer is visiting you, I think, in a few weeks. He's, the expert in that. So hopefully you ask him the same question. My personal experience is that VR is really helpful in terms of engagement, right? If you're wearing VR goggles, you walk into a cave and you can see all your data, you turn around, you see it. There's something really visceral about being able to experience your data rather than just looking at it. And I think I've worked with like the NeuroCave project, working with Olu Aguilar. He loved going to VR and seeing his data in VR, and especially for me, I find the interaction really unwieldy, and I would say that's a downside. And it's probably why I don't work in VR as much as I used to, because I find it hard to do anything besides look at it. So if you want to like actually move stuff around or press on things, so I think there's still, even though VR has been around a long time, and obviously there's breakthroughs with some of the consumer VR devices, I still find, especially in terms of like precise control for analyzing data, I still find the controls unwieldy and limiting. But I think at the same time, I think there's a lot of opportunities for people to think about interaction modalities in VR. But the benefit is that it's, one, for the average person, it really is really exciting to see data like that. But also for researchers themselves, many times I've talked to researchers, when they see their data in VR, they have new insights just by representing it in space. Literally, you just take a network diagram and all of a sudden it's in space in 3D. Somehow that gives them a new perspective they didn't have before. So I don't know. I'm both impressed by people's experiences and at the same time a little skeptical. I think there's probably a lot of aspects of VR that haven't yet been explored. And I think some of the games that I've seen in VR, even simple things like Beat Saber, which have very simple interfaces, show that you can get really, you can truly be immersed and engaged in whatever it is, whether it's things flying at you. So I think maybe one aspect of translating normal data viz projects into VR, which could be pushed, is in VR, if things are static, it's great to see them, but actually we have this infinite space in VR. Why not take advantage of more game-like effects where things are moving or exploding or bouncing? I think that could be something about the space, to me, maybe lends itself to more busier game-like representations. I don't know. I'm not sure.
So thanks. And a follow-up question could be like, I wonder, like, what do you think about the effectiveness of using VR or AR system to demonstrate data? Like, because I've read some of the work from other researchers, like some of them present or propose that by using like this kind of VR or AR system, like people's cognitive load when reading the data or comprehending the data can be increased. And from this perspective, it seems like this type of system or environment will just decrease people's ability to interpret the data. I'm not sure. What do you think about that?
That what increases the ability of people to interpret data? Is that what you said?
It decrease the ability.
Decreases. Yeah, that's the common line. Like 3D is bad. You shouldn't use 3D unless it's really necessary. VR is gimmicky. There's no point using it. My counter to that is that I think there's a different aesthetic that needs to, a different kind of visual language or design language that needs to be invented for VR. So again, I mean, you see a lot of some of my work has that kind of minimalist aesthetic, but a lot of it is a little, I wouldn't say busier, but I'm working with animated data or dynamic data, so there's an inherent kind of motion to it. And I think VR spaces, I mean, if you're walking in the real world, like, you're crossing traffic, you're able to like see things move around and respond to it. And if you're in a game, there can be explosions and monsters and lasers and bullets, and you're perfectly capable of reasoning about that scene. So, but I do get this, if you're looking at like a nice, cleaned up Edward Tufte diagram, and then you go into a busy VR space, it can seem really disorienting. So my sense is that the language for VR experiences, particularly in terms of trying to clearly reason about data, is not fully developed yet. And I know there's people working on it, like I just mentioned, Tim Dwyer and other people in the immersive analytics space. So that's, to me, I mean, I mentioned before that artists are working with 3D modeling tools and game engines. Similarly, I think immersive analytics designers can be using those tools to take advantage of the language that games are inventing and appropriate them. I think there's a lot of interesting work that could be done there for sure.
Yeah, great. It seems always like VR and AR, this stuff is always like very popular in every talk. Okay, I would like to have a question following up Professor Rebecca's question. Yeah, I think your suggestion for organic collaboration between artists and these technical people are very useful for some department like this computational media and arts, this new department. I would like to ask a very practical question, because you have been like chairing this CSIG-VIS arts program and this kind of like SIG-GRAPH arts gallery and the paper, these programs. So I'm wondering, like, what suggestions do you have for like some students, or especially for like artists, these students? They are new to like a technique, or they don't have much experience in developing these tools or stuff. And you also mentioned like nowadays these tools are becoming more and more sophisticated. So how should we begin with, like for newcomers, and how can we really publish like papers and demos in this kind of programs? What suggestions do you have?
I think partly it's exposure, right? Different communities evolve best practices, not necessarily for any logical reason, they just kind of happen. And then, so I think it's, I mean, there's no one right way to do thing, right? So if you look at the IEEE, it's all IEEE-VIS now, but it used to be VAST and SCI-VIS and InfoVis. If you look through those sub-conferences and see what are the best papers or what's the work that gets published, there's certain qualities to them. And so I think having students, have art students read the visualization research papers, and then have the visualization researchers read the Viz arts program papers or the SIG-GRAPH arts papers. I think, you shouldn't be intimidated by stuff just because you don't understand it. Like, it just takes some exposure. I also find, in addition to kind of running those programs, I review a lot of papers from different people, and you can kind of tell like a student paper versus a more polished paper. And a lot of the times it's almost like the idea itself, the students are afraid to have a big idea. Like so they end up doing stuff that seems a little bit derivative. They're like, oh, I'm going to visualize, I don't know, like all the flights in the country. And you're like, okay, that's great, but I've seen like 30 of those, right? I mean, if you do something amazing with like airplane traffic, that's great. Or a lot of people are using like bike traffic a lot, because a lot of cities in America, at least, they have free bikes you can hop on. They all have sensors, so you can see. So I review like 10 papers about people hopping on bikes. I'm like, that's great, but think about all the things you could visualize in the world, right? Like, you could visualize the universe, or you could visualize the inside of a cell, or you could visualize, I don't know, your own thoughts, or whatever it might be. So I'd encourage students to on the one hand, be more ambitious and like go after projects they're really excited about, and not be afraid of that their ideas might be wrong. And then, and at the same time, also be more humble and do, take the time to read through the last few years of what's been published, both in the arts conferences and the computer science visualization conferences, to see what's been done before. And it's, it doesn't happen overnight. I think it takes a year or so of exposure to kind of start developing the sensibility about what a good project is. Yeah. And then, I mean, again, I've said this now, I think in response to the other question, but there are some spots that I think are ripe for interesting exploration. And one I think is I think there's a shift that's going to happen in visualization from this minimalist aesthetic to kind of this D3 tableau aesthetic where things are very like muted colors and very laid out very nicely, and there's no animation and 3D's bad, to being influenced by animation software and 3D modeling software and things like Houdini and Grasshopper and game engines like Unity and Unreal. And my sense is more and more projects will kind of take advantage of the capabilities, and they'll figure out what works and what works aesthetically and also functions so that it doesn't overwhelm our perceptual system. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Yeah,
thanks for the suggestion. That's also, that's really a big trend, and there are much opportunities there. Okay, thank you. And okay, so Professor Angus, actually, I heard like Professor Angus recently just did surgery. So this already have been like 1 hour and 15 minutes. So it's really appreciated for this talk and the Q&A session. So we hope Professor Angus can get well soon, and also everyone stay healthy and be safe. Okay, so that's all for today's talk, and let me share some advertisement for the next talk. So for the next talk, we will have Professor Albert Carrier from School of Communication, University Miami. His talk will be visualization for the general public. So this talk will be very useful for those who are interested in like visual communication, this topic. So it's in like 2 weeks and at the same time. So so that's all for today's lecture. So thank you. Thanks again. And yeah, so if the audience, if you have more questions, you can direct your questions to us, and we will forward it to Professor Angus, or you can directly contact Professor Angus through the email. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.